r/NoSleep. Posted by you/likeeyedid. I'm a taxi driver. The other night I had a passenger I will never forget. We are all cursed and we can't even see it. Our eyes won't show us. I was always under the cocky impression that my taxi and I knew the streets of Berlin like no other. You can't begin to imagine the unexpected horrors I've witnessed during my night shifts. You see, people show far less inhibition when it's dark, and sometimes they even reveal a whole different identity. Still, even my 15 years of experience couldn't have prepared me for this one night. Berlin is quite the adjustment if you come from a small Kurdish village like the one I'm from. I've grown to like my work in this city, but it has its goddamn cursed sides, and that's mostly due to the people. Peculiar people that might appear friendly and normal during the day but change entirely as soon as the sun goes down. As a driver, I've learned to observe and notice things. Like when I happen to drive a member of some criminal family around. You won't believe how many of those we have in Berlin. But it's not my place to judge. I'm just a driver. I have tons of stories, some sweet and some disgusting, but there is only one night of driving in all these years that has left me sick to my stomach, one that left such a bitter aftertaste that nothing I eat brings me joy anymore. And that's the night I met Julius. When I don't get a call to go pick someone up, I wait in line with the other taxis at the metro station Neukölln. Sometimes I spend hours there, having coffee and a cigarette with other drivers while waiting for passengers. We tell each other superficial stories about our lives and make bets on who will have the best fare of the night. One time I drove a man to a city 200 miles away, made the same money I'd usually get for 3 entire nights. Julius' fare was in a similar price range, even though we never even left Berlin. At the end of the night, I didn't ask him for money. It was a cold and foggy night, typical for the beginning of March. The type of night that you'd rather just spend in bed if you don't have to work like me. I remember thinking that when the passenger door of my taxi suddenly opened from the outside, letting in a cold gust of wind. The cold swiftly disappeared again as this young man with dark hair and just as dark eyes smiled at me. "Are you free for a ride?" he asked. This man could have been 20 or 36, I honestly couldn't say for sure, but I remember vividly how he was radiating something warm and comfortable. He was wearing slacks and a black jacket, underneath a nice white shirt. I don't know much about clothes, but I could tell that someone had perfectly tailored this wardrobe to his body. Maybe that's why I believed him when he said this would be a long ride but that he had enough money to pay for it. Of course, I said yes and asked if he had any luggage I could help him with. "Just this." He held up a little wrapped package the size of a book and grinned. "But I'll just put it on my lap." He sat down in the passenger seat. Some people do that, usually the ones that are alone and feel like talking. "Where can I take you to? Do you have an address?" I asked. He fastened his seatbelt. "No, not exactly. I'll just give you the directions as we go if that's all right." And that's what he did. It was fine for me as long as the meter was running. "Dill. That's a nice name," he said after looking at the card I have in the front of the car with my name and number on it. "Thank you," I said while starting the car. "It means heart. It's A." I looked behind me to safely leave the line of cars but froze when I noticed that the cars behind me were gone. And not just the other taxis. Everyone was gone. The entire outside area of the metro station looked deserted. I looked at Julius but he didn't even seem to notice anything was wrong, he just smiled. For a split second, I swear I saw something moving in the reflection of the window next to him, but when I blinked it was gone. "Heart. That's beautiful," he said casually. I swallowed and rubbed my eyes. Another look outside proved to me that I'd been imagining things. There were people with bags rushing to their cars, taxi drivers standing around with a cigarette, drunken teenagers loudly chatting. Everything was normal. It was after 3 a.m. These things happen during night shifts. Your mind gets foggy. I just couldn't let this man notice. I didn't want to lose a fare that would make such good money. Luckily, he was oblivious and continued our conversation. I go by Julius but I have no clue what that means. We both laughed. "Well, it's nice to meet you, Julius," I said and meant it. We passed one of my taxi driver buddies as we drove off. He tilted his pale face as he watched us drive off with a distraught look in his eyes. I felt a knot in my stomach as I passed him but didn't yet understand what my gut was trying to say. When there are passengers in my car I have the occasional chat with them about the weather or the latest football game, but I'm not a talkative man. Some people pour out their souls but those are the ones I use the least words with. Once in a while, however, I'll meet a special person who doesn't simply talk to fill the silence in the car but who is genuinely and truly interested in the lives of others. Julius was just like that. Special. "Do you have night shifts often?" he asked as we were driving down a particularly dark road. "Only on weekends. Money's best Friday and Saturday nights," I said. "You must sleep away the rest of your weekend then," he laughed and I joined in. "Well, sleep is a wonderful thing. There's nothing more comfortable than resting your head on a soft pillow after a long night," I said. "I absolutely agree. If I could sleep forever, I would," he laughed, but it sounded forced. "It's ironic, isn't it? We work so hard to earn a living, but as a result, we wind up losing the time to actually go out and live." With all his confidence, there was also a melancholic side to him. His charisma reminded me of my older brother. But in some ways, I also saw myself in him. I sighed. If it were up to me, I'd have a simple life. A small house in a village with a garden. Plant my own veggies and maybe have a couple of chickens. I added to his thought. Julius turned to me with a raised eyebrow. Our eyes met for a second before I had to turn mine back to the street in front of us. His eyes were incredibly dark, as if they only consisted of pupils. I know that sounds creepy, but it wasn't. It felt familiar. Distracted by our conversation, it took me a while to realize that we were driving down roads I'd never seen before. Driving in between multi-story buildings without any lights on. Well, it was the middle of the night, but still. And it felt incredibly strange not to recognize my surroundings. I'm a taxi driver, I always felt like I knew the whole city. Well, something must have happened down that road of yours to end up in the biggest city in Germany then, Julius interrupted my thoughts. I laughed. I'm here because of my family. The village life with chickens isn't for them, I said, surprising myself. I never open up to strangers. No, I never open up to people at all. Oh. Julius called out as he leaned back a little. You're a family man, of course, you're a family man. And we do everything for our family, right? The way he said those words made me feel a little odd for a second, but I shrugged it off. Always. Julius smiled. We interrupted our conversation as we'd arrived at Julius' first destination. A small kiosk where he needed to drop off his mysterious package. I'll be back in a second, wait here. He looked at me with a surprisingly intimidating look. If you don't know what a kiosk looks like, it's basically a tiny corner shop. The windows are filled with beer crates and bottles, so you can't see inside too well. I have no idea what happened when Julius was in there, only that after a few minutes all the lights inside the shop suddenly turned off. That little shop that was the only source of light on this dark street anyway now almost disappeared in front of my eyes. I had weirdly trusted this stranger because everything seemed so fine and I'd felt so comfortable. But after he left the car, I got this odd feeling inside. A new sense of paranoia mixed with a rush of anxiety. Something inside of me was shouting to get the hell away. I looked for my phone but couldn't find it quickly enough. Impulsively, I set my foot on the gas and got ready to leave, but before I could, the back door of my car opened. Julius jumped back inside, with the same friendly smile through those familiar eyes. Except now he wasn't sitting next to me but behind me. Where to now, my friend? I nervously asked, hoping he didn't realize that I was just about to take off. I don't know why I didn't simply tell him to fuck off. For some reason, I couldn't find any courage. I'm glad you called me that. I'd like for us two to be friends, Dill. He took a deep breath. Just follow the street for now. I started driving, again following the streets as my passenger instructed me. Finally, I felt like I recognized the area again. We were back in Neukölln. Dill, my friend. Let's get back to our family conversation. Do you get along well with your son? I stayed silent for a moment. We used to be closer. Teenagers aren't always easy to deal with, I laughed. Oh yes, teenagers. Things are much better with your daughter, I assume? We were driving down a quiet neighborhood again, with few lights, and I had to really focus on the street. Yours too? My daughter, well, she is a wonderful kid but also a little bit off lately. Not quite herself. Teenager too, I guess. I stopped speaking. We'd been driving around and talking for so long that it really took me a second to realize what had just happened. I'd never told him that I had a daughter and a son. Oh yes, she's more distant, locking herself up in her room, hardly eating any food anymore. That's unfortunate. You still love them though, am I right? He said. I felt incredibly nervous. I'd made some big mistake by trusting this man with my thoughts all night. Something was definitely wrong, but I had to try my best to stay collected. He could have some really bad connections. Oh, I have love for my family. But don't we all? I nervously said. No, you don't. Surprised at his sudden change of tone, I looked into the rearview window to make some eye contact. Julius, the man I had been driving around with all night, was gone. I looked into the face of a creature I had never seen before. His dark eyes that felt so kind earlier now looked completely wrong. As if someone had slammed a screwdriver into his eye sockets and filled them with a dark void. They were holes in his face, filled with some kind of fungi. Repulsed by this entirely wrong face, I forgot to watch the street for a moment and almost crashed into a parked car. I swerved just in time, catching my breath and collecting my courage. My heart was beating so fast I thought it would jump out of my chest. It was late at night. I hadn't slept. I didn't have any water for hours. I was hallucinating, I told myself. Though at the same time I couldn't bring myself to look in that mirror again. Is something wrong, my friend? He chuckled. I instinctively turned my head around and saw the same Julius with his regular face sitting there, with a smile on his face. Yes, sorry, I mumbled. Long night. Slowly, I tried to collect myself again. What did you do inside that kiosk? I finally asked, surprised at my own sudden courage. Even if that face was a hallucination, but this man still knew things about my children that he shouldn't. He seemed so interested in my life earlier. In reality, he wasn't trying to get any information out of me though. He already knew everything. What was this man trying to get from me? I had to get rid of him but be smart about it. So I decided to drive towards the home of my brother. My brother, well, he is an intimidating man with a lot of power. A shady man who doesn't shy away from violence. If this Julius meant danger, he'd know what to do. Julius' eyes were closed. I thought he might even fall asleep, so I quickly changed the direction. I tried to stay confident but my entire body was shaking at this point. As if he was reading my mind, Julius' eyes opened and I knew without a shadow of a doubt that this night would ruin the rest of my life. Don't try to be smart, Dill, Julius suddenly spoke with a low voice. I clenched the steering wheel so hard that it looked like the skin on my hands would crack open any second. I know where you are going. Don't. I have no interest in meeting your brother. Not tonight, he spoke. How do you? I whispered. I know you saw me. In the mirror. You didn't scream. I like that. You know I feel like I can be myself around you, he grinned. My eyes went to the rearview mirror. None of it was a hallucination. I don't know how to describe it in better words, but I know for a fact that this thing was not human. It was hiding behind human skin. Now I'm gonna be honest because I do truly enjoy your company. This night wasn't about dropping off the package. That's a different business of mine. Tonight was about getting to know you. A million different thoughts were racing through my mind, but all I asked was, why me? He chuckled again. Oh, please don't be worried, my friend. I can feel this entire car shaking. I'm not here to hurt you. This is about your family. It's corrupted. I could smell it on you from miles away. I swallowed. If you're not going to hurt me, what else do you want from me? Julius was smiling at me through the mirror, his mouth revealing a set of rotten teeth. Being what I am, it's lonely. The fact that your family is corrupted isn't a bad thing. You know, maybe you could introduce me to them sometime. We were on an empty road. There were no people around, nobody that I could ask for help, but I still hit the brakes. I felt sick, but not from whiplash. You're wondering whether you should jump out of the car. Wondering if you could outrun me, he sighed. But you won't. I took a deep breath. No, I won't, I whispered. Because you love your family. I nodded. And because you noticed that the eyes of your daughter have recently started to look a little bit like mine, he smiled again and I stayed frozen. Maybe you should check her reflection, my friend. Are your eyes open?